Right? The American system runs on oil. We need more and more oil. We cannot guarantee that oil through market mechanisms. We need military means to ensure our guarantee of that oil. Our present suppliers of oil cannot be guaranteed as well. If you look at the two top suppliers of oil to the Americans over the last decades, number one is Saudi Arabia. Everybody who knows anything about Al Qaeda knows that they come from Saudi Arabia in the main. Knows that there is a massive level of anger and hatred aimed against the Americans because of the stationing of American troops in the land of the two holy places, you know, in Saudi Arabia. There's a massive level of anger that's fed into the growth of Al Qaeda. But at the same time, the second power, the second biggest supplier of oil to the Americans, you probably won't know, is Venezuela. And in Venezuela over the last year, there has been essentially a massive movement to the left. The Chavez's government, which the Americans tried to, were behind an attempt at coup to get rid of, because essentially a left reformist, an attempted kind of reformist sort of government, socialistic government in Venezuela. There is a threat in those terms of Islamicism in the Middle East and a threat of kind of, if you like, socialism in the Americas. Threat to American oil, and America runs on oil. Without oil, the country would collapse. Now, in that context, they understand what Professor Michael Clare talks. The Americans have got a policy of global oil acquisition. They have to be in control of the oil. So there is a broader context if America wants to be the top dog in the world, and within that there is the crucial issue of controlling oil and controlling the oil from the Middle East, and being able to say if there is an Islamist uprising in somewhere like Saudi Arabia, that they are in control of the country with the second largest oil reserves in the region, Iraq, and can use Iraq, talking nonsense of axis of evil and whatever else, as a staging post to control the oil of Kuwait, to control the oil of Iran. They are very clear about this. We should be very clear about this as well. Now, what, in terms of a transformation in the nature of the American strategy, right? There's a deal of myth talked about the difference between the Clinton administration, liberal, blah blah blah, administration, and the Bush administration. We've got to be very clear in there are differences, but the differences pale into insignificance in comparison to the similarities. When Madeleine Albright said, 500,000 Iraqi kids is a price worth paying in 1996, we know that these people were murdering bastards. And when Bill Clinton hide away from, getting a blowjob from somebody who blows up the fucking medicine factory in Sudan, we know these people are murdering bastards. We also know Madeleine Albright, when she was the US ambassador to the UN, said quite clearly, we will use multilateral mechanisms when we feel that we can, and we will use unilateral means when we feel that we must. What has transformed over the last 18 months in America, what 9/11 has allowed the Americans to do, is really to go on the offensive, and in particular to mobilise public opinion in the States for warfare. In the first case in Afghanistan, and secondly in Iraq. To push forward this belief that there can be war. Now, the Americans, as everybody knows, who knows anything about it, are terrified of body bags coming home after Vietnam and all the rest of it. So the mobilisation of public opinion isn't simply the only element of the strategy. The second element is this, that I talked about briefly before, is this revolution in military affairs. This belief that the Americans have that they have got now these new technologies, they can fly in high, smart bombs and whatever else, take out Saddam, whoever, with relatively few casualties. And we can see, they have had relatively few casualties thus far in the first 3 weeks of this war, to be able to take out a country. Now let's have a look at, when people talk about, the arguments for and against war in Iraq, one of the things that they talk about is, well, look what's happened in Afghanistan. Relatively few casualties. We took out the Afghan government. And on the basis of taking out the Afghan government, we've now got this Karzai, democracy stretching the thing over there, but we've now got this better government than the Taliban than we had in the Taliban years in Afghanistan. But if we actually look at the reality of the Afghanistan situation, stuff that I've read on this situation basically suggests that in December 2001. The Americans realised that if they seriously wanted to have a firefight to go into Kabul, there would be a bloodbath. Right? And what happened, and the Taliban knew it, everybody knew it, there would be a bloodbath, and basically a de facto agreement was made whereby the leadership was shifted into Pakistan, the rank and file of the Taliban was shifted into the southern regions of Afghanistan, and Karzai was set up as in control of Kabul. And essentially what you've got in Kabul is, you know, Karzai, supposedly the leader of the country, is in fact the mayor of daytime Kabul. He's not even the mayor of nighttime Kabul, you know. And in terms of his support, he is surrounded constantly by US special forces to defend himself. There are no Afghans who can be trusted to support Karzai at any point. And in Afghanistan, it's widely believed that Karzai is a career CIA person. The idea is just because he's Afghani doesn't make him in any sense a representative of the Afghani regime. So while there has been this myth of a quick triumph and a shift towards, you know, Western style, blah blah blah, there's going to be democracy in elections in 2004 in Afghanistan, large deal of myth there. The reality is an incredibly fragmented political system. What we've got in Iraq is a similar sort of situation. People talked about, reading again, you know, a lot of the literature on this issue, talked about the Iraqi generals over the last 10 years are not stupid. They know the Americans have been coming at one point or another. They've been reading the Vietnamese. They've been reading what Al Gap wrote in 1961 before the Vietnam War, with the Americans at least kicked off, where he basically argued you don't take on the enemy where they are strong. You know, we aren't stupid enough to line our tanks up in the stand and allow the tank busters to come in and fry us all. We take on the enemy where they are weak. Right? So there's this element to us learning from, and we don't really know what's going to go on at a military level in Iraq at that level, but we can see at least elements of that sort of strategy coming through. Again, we saw in the FT a week ago Friday, in the FT was talking about in America this real fear of the ghost of the Tet Offensive. In Vietnam in 1968, an uprising in 38 towns across southern Vietnam by Vietnamese, really militarily defeated by the Americans, but politically and psychologically showed that the Americans were not going to liberate. Right? Now we've not had that, there's no direct parallel with that by any stretch of the imagination, but we have seen there's no real love of the Americans. There's nobody, this is not, you know, Baghdad today is not Paris 1944. There are not going to be in 9 months' time lots of little American babies popping out. You know, because, you know, thousands of people have been shagging the American liberators as they were in Paris in 1944. Nobody is particularly keen on the Americans and the British in Baghdad and Basra. They might not like Saddam, but not stupid enough to like the British and the Americans, because they understand that the key issue for them is oil. Right? And for all the talk about instituting democracy in Iraq, they simply cannot do it, because if you institute democracy in Iraq, you allow the people of Iraq to control their own oil. Now, what is the point of this conflict if you then allow these people to control their own oil, firstly? Secondly, if you allow democracy in Iraq, they will give national rights to the Kurds. If you allow national rights to the Kurds, that de facto destabilises the region. Kurds are a massive minority in Turkey, a massive minority in Iran, as well as being minorities in Azerbaijan and other places. Right? It will completely destabilise the region. The reason why Bush Sr. didn't go for a kill in '91 is precisely because he didn't want to destabilise the region.